Catullus 1 describes Catullus's work. He's talking about a libellum, which is a diminutive, and it's going to mean little book. So we start off with this question, cui, from your qui quo quod. It's going to be in the dative, so it'll mean like to whom. And then you get your verb and your subject right here, dono. So to whom do I give? And then libellum is going to be your direct object. And we've got 3 words describing libellum. We've got novum, lepidum, and expolitum. These 2 are adjectives. This is also an adjective, but it's a participle. So this is a perfect passive participle. And so you'll translate them probably in that order, hit your expolitum, and then hit this ablative arida, and that's going to go with pumike. And that's going to be probably translated with like an ablative of means. And then modo here will mean just now. So we asked this question, and then he has this vocative Cornelius, and then a dative to you. So I give it to you. And so this Cornelius, we'll read his works later in the year. Cornelius Nepos wrote a lot of history. And so this is going to be a really stark contrast between the sort of work that Catullus does, which is more shorter poems that aren't about historical things. It's more about him personally. So he has decided to dedicate his book to Cornelius. Then we find out here, this will just be for you, and that will be referring back to Cornelius, were accustomed. And then this next line, we have 2 infinitives, and we're going to start with putare, so to think. And then this is going to introduce an indirect statement, so to think that. So indirect statement. So to think that my meas nugas, this is a really good example of a hyperbaton where they're separated. I'm going to give this a squiggle underline because it's the subject of my indirect statement. And then esse is my verb. So my meas nugas was aliquid. And so this should just be a complement, so also accusative. Now then, and then this cum is going to mean when. We do not have a subjunctive. Aus s is indicative. This is a special verb. This is a semi-deponent. So here it looks passive, but it will be translated actively. And this means dared. And then unus would kind of be an apposition to you, Cornelius. So you dared, kind of maybe put in a comma here, one of the Italians. So you dared, and then jump down to your infinitive, to explicare. And the notes help a little bit with this, but omne iwum is going to mean like literally every age, all age, but probably like all history. And then we have cartes, and this is going to mean like volumes. So think of this as your scrolls in ancient times. So in 3, and then we've got, again, just like with our first work up here, it's in the same place, which is interesting. But now we're talking about Cornelius's work versus Catullus's. So we've got 3, and then doctis is describing it, and then laboriosis is describing it. So 3 adjectives describing cartes, scrolls or volumes. And then this Jupiter is like a exclamation in the middle there. So by Jupiter, like holy moly, I can't even believe it. All right, so he's talking about his book versus Cornelius's book. Now that he's described both of the works, he's going to go back to his own book, so the Libelli. So he says, therefore, habe is an imperative. Tibi is your indirect object, so for yourself. And then these are going to be your direct object, more or less. So whatever this, and then literally libelli means of a little book, and it's a genitive. This is a partitive genitive. We would probably say something like whatever this little book, and then maybe supply an est. So he kind of is minimizing his own text here. Then he says quale cumque, which means whatever it's worth. So again, kind of referring to the book here. And then our quod is referring back to the libelli, which, and it's a little bit of an awkward translation here, but it's going to then serve, this quod is going to serve as the subject of maneat down here. Maneat is a adjussive subjunctive. We've talked about this a little bit. That's where your subjunctive is the main verb. It's often in the present tense, and it'll be translated as may or let, kind of just whatever sounds better. So I think may makes a little bit more sense here. So may it remain, referring to his book. He then addresses the patron maiden, so kind of like the muse here. This word perenne is describing the book, so I'll just draw my arrow there. So may it remain plus is more, and that'll take an ablative of comparison. And so that's going to be your uno and your cyclos. This is a good hyperbaton, perhaps showing time across the line or something to that effect. But you'll translate that as than. Okay, so the question is, does he value Cornelius's book? Does he value his own book? What do you think?